I really enjoyed this week's TED Talk by Nora Blum on the subject of mental health, and I think she made several really important points that I want to talk about. First, I really appreciated her use of analogy for mental health issues and the toothache that she described. Um, I think it's really important to understand that mental health doesn't necessarily manifest itself in a visible way, and it's pretty much never exclusively tied to one event or one stimulus that you can pick out and say, this happened and this is why I'm feeling this way. And I think that's part of why mental health issues are so hard. Most of the times, the emotions that are being felt can't really be identified or rationalized through. And I know that for my own experience with my mental health issues, this was one of the hardest parts for me because I've always had a very high tolerance for physical pain. I've always been very able to move past the pain, to cope with that pain, to identify the pain and rationalize through it. But with mental health issues, that process becomes a whole lot more difficult. So I think that's a really important thing to understand for both approaching people with mental health issues and for addressing your own mental health issues. Second, I really like that she included the statistic about the number of people worldwide who suffer from mental health issues. She said it was about 600 million people, which is a tenth of the population. And I wasn't necessarily super shocked by the how high this number is. What shocks me more is how alone we feel in our own experience with mental health, even though we know these statistics. We know that there are so many people out there struggling with very similar situations, but we still feel so alone, and the loneliness is so overwhelming and devastating. And I personally believe that the way to approach this is through being vulnerable about your own experiences, talking about them, sharing them with other people, because I think that gives other people an avenue to speak up and say, hey, me too. Like, that's something I experience with as well. And if that's a potential avenue for them to go seek the help that they need, I think that the difficulty with being vulnerable and talking about your own experiences is definitely worth it. There's one podcast that I was listening to, and a woman was talking about how she had dealt with her own mental health issues, depression, anxiety for several years, but never told anyone in her family, never really addressed it, just kind of like dealt on her own. And one day she got a phone call saying that her younger brother had committed suicide. And she said the thing that just still plagues her to this day is the question of what if she would have told him? Like, what if she would have reached out and said, hey, this is something I'm dealing with? Would he have said, hey, I'm dealing with this too? And would that have been an avenue for him to go seek the help that he needed rather than ultimately resulting to taking his own life? Third, I completely agree with her statement that medical treatment on its own is not enough. I think this is a really big issue with the way that we approach the mental health issue today in our society. I personally believe in creating techniques and tools and strategies that are going to be long-standing, that are going to last a lot longer than the effects of a pill. And this isn't to say that medical treatment doesn't help, because for some people I think it is really necessary, but I think it should be paired with things like cognitive behavioral therapy, which is what she mentioned that her program that she's a part of does. And again, relating this back to my own experience, when I finally opened up to my parents and said that I was dealing with these things and I needed help, I told them from day one I didn't want medical treatment. I didn't want to be dependent on any sort of drug. I would rather find tools and create strategies that could effectively help me in the future deal with these things rather than just numbing them or subsiding them. And one skill that I found very useful is cognitive appraisal. And basically, what cognitive appraisal is just it's the gap, the space in between the stimulus and the emotion. So these things don't happen consecutively or even at the same time. There is a space, and that space is where you appraise the situation, that's your perception, your assessment of the stimuli. So if you can rewire your brain to perceive and assess certain stimuli differently, then your emotional and behavioral responses are also going to change as a result. And to me, this is a much more withstanding and enduring and effective way for combating these issues because, quite frankly, mental health issues don't go away. You just get better at dealing with them. And again, this is just something that I've found really helpful in my own experiences. Lastly, and I think this is one of the most important points, is her saying that we need to let people know that it's okay to not be okay. And I personally believe that our society places way too much emphasis and value on positive emotions. And, I think that we're stuck in this constant pursuit of happiness, if you will. And I think that this is really toxic because I think it makes us overlook the importance and value of the negative emotions. And negative emotions are really important for at least two reasons. They're evolutionarily adaptive. Without things like fear and anger and sadness, our ancestors wouldn't have been able to survive. We wouldn't even be here. Those are signals that something is wrong and you either need to fight or you need to flee, things like that. So for that reason, they're really important. And then second, they serve as a counterpoint to positive emotions. So, I think without things like sadness and anger and whatever other negative emotions you want to list off, we wouldn't fully experience the emotionality that comes along with things like happiness and joy and rapture. Without the negative, the positive wouldn't be as positive. So I think it's really important to understand that negative emotions are natural. They're healthy. Nothing's wrong with you if you feel them. It's just that our society does place a whole lot of emphasis on the positive emotions. So we get this idea that if we're not happy all the time, something must be wrong. So yeah, overall, I really agree with Nora Blum and her call for change because, quite frankly, this issue isn't going to go away. It just keeps getting worse. More people every day are committing suicide and are suffering from things like depression and anxiety. And I really think the only way to address this and to fix the problem is to come up with better solutions and better communication methods and better treatment approaches to help fix some of these issues and address some of these issues.